And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. Today, I want to dive into the topic of why parental rights need to be defended. Why parental rights need to be defended. Now, I've been raising awareness and perhaps raising the alarm about this issue for some time, but I wanted to dedicate an entire episode to it because of some recent developments. Now, many Christian families are stepping up to the difficult challenge of raising their children according to biblical principles in a quickly changing culture. But what happens if your teenager or even a younger child declares himself or herself to be transgender or homosexual? We've talked previously about this issue from a cultural apologetic standpoint, from a ministry standpoint, of certainly speaking to that young person with grace and truth, asking that question, what do you mean by that? What in your life has led you to this statement? How can we work with you on that? Certainly bringing biblical principles to bear in that conversation, and just dealing with it as a difficult situation. But what happens if the state actually steps in and prevents you from having that ongoing relationship with your child, and simply because of your biblical principles, your belief that what is best, what is good for your child is to live consistent with Scripture, that is treated as neglect or abuse, and your child is actually removed from your home? This is certainly a startling development, but one that I'm afraid if some things don't change, we're going to see around the country. So someone may be listening to this thinking, well, why are you talking about this issue? Aren't there a lot of other things to talk about in culture? And I am certainly mindful of this. I don't want to just get sucked into speaking just about controversial issues. There are so many things to look at as we are Christian citizens, things like foster care, the drug crisis, mental health, and we do speak to those. But when you're talking about a parent's right to the custody of their own child, the ability of a parent to raise their child consistent with those biblical principles, this to me is something of the highest order. And I get most excited legally and in the public square when the state is interfering with either the churches or the family's disciple-making function. And that is exactly what I'm talking about today. Parents saying, here's what is best for a child, here's what's consistent with Scripture, the state stepping in, saying, no, we know best. We're going to, in a sense, insert our judgment, substitute our judgment for that of the parents. And I was speaking to a Christian statesman recently about this issue, and he was laughing about a particular interview where someone asked him about his position on religious liberty vis-a-vis LGBTQ rights. And so he kind of goes into this topic and he's talking about it. And the reporter that asked the question then kind of interrupts him and says, you know what, you Christians, this is all you talk about. That was the question the reporter asked. So we do try to have a comprehensive approach to Christian citizenship, but this is one of those issues that is a very important and weighty concern. One of the reasons that I'm talking about this is because of a development here in the state of Indiana. And if you're watching the video, I'm actually recording this in our Indiana State House here today for some ministry events. And I'm actually in what we affectionately term a Zoom booth. They're old phone booths, but they left them here and they make for a great spot to have a conversation. They just don't have great lighting. All right. So we do what we can while we're here. But here in the state of Indiana, and I have published this case or talked about it on World News as well as on Facebook and such. But DCS, which is our Department of Child Services and a trial court, intervened in a home. And these were Christian parents. They're providing for all of the physical, educational, medical, mental health needs of their child. They simply could not, as Christians, they believe that we're created as immutably male and female, as an expression of the image and nature of God, and that we flourish when we embrace who God created us to be. That's what they believe. They also very heavily researched this issue of gender dysphoria and the various ways to treat it, and they did not believe that affirmation of their child was in their child's best interest. Despite that, DCS and the trial court intervened in their home. That child was removed from their custody. The child was placed in a home specifically chosen because that home would affirm the child's transgender ideology. The parents were barred from speaking about the issue of transgenderism and, of course, their religious beliefs about the issue. outside of therapy, and they were limited to visitation just a few hours, 1 day a week. Now, I have practiced in the child in need of services area. That's the specific language here in Indiana that has to do with abuse and neglect. And in my time doing that, I've represented parents that actually kind of admitted to either physically abusing or their children or being on drugs, but they got their life back in order. And within, 6 to 8 months, they had their children back in their home. But this child was out of the parents' home for more than 17 months, eventually aging out. He was never placed back in their custody. To make matters worse, the Indiana Court of Appeals recently held that the removal of this child from the parents' home over the issue of transgenderism did not impose a substantial burden on the parents' free exercise of religion, nor did it violate their right to the care, custody, and control of their child. The Court of Appeals also justified the bar on the parents' religiously motivated speech about the issue and compared the parents' speech and beliefs about transgenderism to two parents yelling at or insulting one another in front of their child. So again, I raise this issue because I'm sure you can see the implications of this case. And this case has already hit a number of the legal blogs all around the country. And that if you are a Christian parent and you're raising your child, your teenager, and you have a difficult situation where you're trying to love your child the best that you can, but you believe what is best for them is to live consistent with their biological sex, that child is declaring no, because of what they've learned on the internet or from friends, from what they've studied on YouTube, etc., from their peers, even what they've learned at school, that, hey, look, if you don't affirm me, you're harming me. And if that child claims that the disagreement with you is going to harm their mental health, maybe lead to an eating disorder, then the state can come in and take your child from you. That is just the simple and startling, chilling implication of this case. Now, when I first got involved in this matter, as I've represented these parents, I thought I misunderstood what was going on. Surely I understand the disagreements over girls' sports and the issues of bathrooms, but the custody of a child in religious parents, I just thought I misunderstood something. But nope, that I as time went on, it became very clear that was the state's role. Now, certainly DCS here in the state of Indiana, the trial court have tried to paint this case as something other than a disagreement over transgenderism, citing specifically to an eating disorder. But the facts speak for themselves. Despite fully complying with the state and DCS and the trial court, that child was out of their home for 17 months. He was placed specifically in a home that affirmed his transgender ideology. They were barred from speaking about transgenderism, and he was never placed back in their custody. Again, 17 months. He's out of their home. So that was just kind of introduction. I mentioned parental rights need to be protected. They must be protected. And so I wanted to just introduce the episode. By the way, that is a published Indiana Court of Appeals opinion. If you're familiar with juvenile law and the confidentiality requirements there, I did at least want to mention that to you. The Indiana Court of Appeals published the facts of this case. So I want to give you 3 reasons why I believe parental rights need to be protected. Now, perhaps via that introduction, that might be all that you need to hear. But I wanted to go back and dig into this a little bit, just like we've tried to do with other issues, to step back from the cultural fight over these issues. So, well, what does Scripture say? What's actually going on? I don't want to just be spouting a bunch of hyperbole here. What's actually going on? And then kind of some practical takeaways for Christian parents and also ministries such as Christian schools, student ministries, colleges, anybody that's working with minors under the age of 18. There would be some perhaps that make it to college before that age. So I would give you 3 reasons why parental rights need to be protected. The first one would be that parents, not the state, are primarily responsible for the formation of their children. Secondly, state and federal constitutions have long protected these rights. And the third one is that current protections are insufficient. So 3 reasons why we need to be aware of this. We need to work on it. So the first reason why I believe parental rights need to be protected, certainly is we're talking about Christian citizenship, is that parents and not the state are primarily responsible for the formation of their children. in Deuteronomy chapter number 11, 18, and 19, talks about how parents have that primary responsibility to raise their children according to biblical principles. And it's interesting, specifically in scripture, that the father is tasked. Now, it's not that the mother doesn't have a huge role in this spiritual formation, but this is one of the responsibilities, dads, as I'm talking to you, as fathers, this is a responsibility that ultimately lands on our shoulders. And just for a couple of proof texts here, Deuteronomy 11, 18, and 19. Therefore, shall you lay up my words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be frontlets before your eyes, or between your eyes. And you shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. In Isaiah 38, 19, the father to the children shall make known your truth. Now, this responsibility, which certainly extends into the New Testament, as we know that we're supposed to love our children and to instruct them, that this includes both love, but also discipline, like instruction and correction. All right. So it isn't just to kind of be a buddy or just a life coach in a sense, but actually to be a parent. All right. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 29:17, correct your son. He shall give you rest. Yea, he shall give delight unto your soul. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath in Ephesians 6:4, but bring them up. Again, interesting. It focuses there on the father. The mother, certainly a huge role, but that's father as a spiritual leader of the home. He is commanded, provoke not your children to wrath, bring them up in the nurture and admonition. So in the instruction and even the discipline of the Lord. And then Christ confirmed the importance of this responsibility, the importance of our ministry to children. Matthew 19:14. Jesus said, suffer little children, forbid them not to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. So we shouldn't do anything that would prevent children from learning of Christ and coming to him. So that's a very basic biblical principle, but I did want to just underline that for Christians. If there was any misunderstanding about the institution, the role of the institution of the state versus the family and the church, these three God-ordained institutions, it is first and foremost the family's responsibility to raise their children. The church is supposed to assist with that, right? And with that role, certainly. And then the state is to provide order and to promote good. All right, it shouldn't be interfering in that family's discipleship role or substituting its judgment for that of the family, saying, no, we know best. So that's the first reason why parental rights need to be protected. Clearly a key biblical responsibility of parents to raise up their children, to raise them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Secondly, I would say that state and federal constitutions have long protected these rights. There's a key U.S. Supreme Court case called Troxel versus Granville. I'll get into the facts here in a second. But this case said that this right, the right of parents, and here's the language, to the care, custody, and control of their child. I don't know if the justice that wrote this up was a Baptist preacher or a preacher of some sort that was just an alliterator, but the care, custody, and control of your children, this case says, is perhaps the oldest of the fundamental liberty interests. And you think about this is true across all time, across all civilizations. The right to be able to raise your own children, to lead them. When you see totalitarian regimes throughout history, what is one of the things that they tried to do? They tried to train the children. You think of Hitler's youth. They tried to indoctrinate those children in the state's ideology and away from the parents. So it follows that parents have a fundamental right, all right? So a right of the highest order to make the decisions concerning the care of their children. Here's another legal principle. The state does not have a special interest in substituting its judgment through the authority of a judge for that of a child's parent and carrying out those responsibilities. This is both a profound legal right, but also very practical, right? Because the state of Indiana, the United States, does not know how best to raise a child in your home. You're the one, your family, you birthed the kid, you have been with the child every day of their life, you know their personality, you know their troubles, you know their challenges, you know what's best. So in Troxel versus Granville, which had to do with grandparent visitation, it was a difficult fact scenario where a husband had passed away, the mom had the kids, and the grandparents wanted to have visitation with the children. The mom just didn't think that was best. So the grandparents filed suit, and the court said, look, as long as a parent is fit, and that's an important legal word, fit, meaning adequately caring for the child, the state must presume that that parent is acting in the child's best interest. All right. Therefore, grandparents, you don't get to question that mom. The mom, again, is the one that's there with him every day. Therefore, we're going to presume that that mother has the kid's best interest in mind. So this fundamental right to the care, custody, and control of children includes consideration for educational, medical care, for educational decisions, medical care, and even mental health, decision-making, and religious upbringing. By the way, a lot of states will protect even corporal punishment. Now, that doesn't mean you get to just hit your kid in a way that bruises or harms them in an angry way. But many states recognize religious values and even corporal punishment. But also, you have to be mindful of the case Wisconsin versus Yoder, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case that literally said the Amish have the right not to send their kids to public schools. So they recognize the Amish do life very differently than the rest of society. And one of the things that comes up sometimes in cases is, well, Christian parents are limiting limiting access to the internet or limiting access to certain social media apps, as if that's a problem. And I'm always over there kind of laughing, like you are mindful of Wisconsin versus Yoder, which says that literally the Amish are okay. And if I remember correctly, and again, I know there are different sects of the Amish, but pretty much no electronic devices. The Supreme Court says that's okay. That is your fundamental interest as a parent. And so it does make me chuckle a little bit when that becomes an issue. And so again, these rights are, again, some of the most fundamental historic liberty interests of citizens of the United States. And so when that is challenged, it is certainly important to remember this. And I think our society is quickly moving away from the right of parents. And it reminds me of a G.K. Chesterton idea or quote where he talks about removing a gate from a road. The idea is, you come to a gate in the road, you're not quite sure why it's there. He just reminds everyone, like, before you just pull up that gate or before you destroy the fence, before you move the goalpost, whatever it is, you might want to step back and consider for just a few minutes why that's there. Right. And certainly this would be true as well. And we live in a time where perhaps what has been commonly perceived as common sense is no longer common. But the general idea behind this, again, is just that parents know best what their kids need. And only in very severe circumstances would the state intervene in the home. So that's, again, state and federal constitutions have long protected these rights. And the third reason I would say that parental rights need to be protected is that the current protections are insufficient. Now, again, I mentioned to you when I first got involved in this case, I'm like, surely that's not what you're claiming. Surely you're not claiming that because of your religious beliefs, because of your thorough research in a very novel situation where a child is claiming as a biological male that they're actually female, or a biological female that they're actually male, that in this very novel situation that the parent that won't go along with this transgender revolution, that is somehow neglect or abuse. But again, that is exactly what's being premised here. So a couple of thoughts along these lines. And I'll often mention that rights, as James Madison said, are parchment barriers. You would think that they're concrete barriers and nothing's going to get through the First Amendment, but they can be frayed. They can be torn, easily pierced if we're not mindful of them, we're not stewarding them, not advocating for them. So just to kind of explain where or why this is a problem, or why it's something if you have children, you think about your grandchildren, why this should be a concern for you, is that parental rights, like any other right, are not absolute. For example, the right to the free exercise of religion does not entitle you to sacrifice a child. All right. That's I don't know that anyone would disagree with that. And if they do, I don't care. All right. If you're saying, well, my deeply held religious beliefs means I get to sacrifice or kill another human being, then that it doesn't extend to that. The state would say, look, we have a compelling interest in protecting the life of another human being, and we're going to do that in a narrowly tailored way, where we're not going to infringe on your beliefs, but we are going to say you can't kill this person. That's murder. So in a similar way, parental rights are not absolute. And I want to make a very clear distinction in between the case that I've been talking about and a situation where you have a parent that is physically or even sexually abusing a child. Our law in the state of Indiana does even have a definition for mental abuse. And this would be constantly berating a child, constantly demeaning them. Now, I think the state must be really cautious about where this would fall over into a parent just expressing a viewpoint, but also a parent that's on drugs and is unable, or on alcohol, or in some sense unable to care for the needs of a child. And so I want to make that very clear. I absolutely believe the state has a role, that if a parent is neglecting or abusing a child, that the state has a role in stepping in and protecting the health and safety of that child. The case I've been talking about is very different. In fact, the Department of Child Services advocated for, and the trial court accepted, the dismissal and what's called the unsubstantiation of all allegations of neglect and abuse against the parents in this case. And so what I'm talking about here is clearly not that. We understand parental rights, like any other right, are not absolute. You can't claim I have the right to punch my kid in the face. All right, you don't have that right. That's battery. It's a crime. And I'm sure DCS will intervene, and rightfully so. And I do respect the Department of Child Services here in the state of Indiana and social workers around the country that are dealing with a drug crisis. And I think part of what is happening in cases like the one I've mentioned is that you have individuals every day dealing with parents that aren't stepping up to meet their responsibilities, that are even intentionally harming their children. And so when you come to the state house, or you come to court saying, no, look, you should protect parental rights, it's just human nature to think about all of the other parents that aren't caring for their children. Now, it is the role of those in those spaces, in those seats, say a judge or social workers, to be able to distinguish between what is a case of abuse or neglect and what is not. But I did want to explain that. Parental rights are not absolute. There are cases where parents are neglecting or abusing children. We recognize the state's right to intervene in those situations. But in the case that I have mentioned, the parents are devout Christians. They're caring for all of the educational, physical, medical, mental health needs of their child. They simply could not, in good conscience, affirm the child's transgender ideology. And essentially what happened in this case is that the child's self-fulfilling self-diagnosis, right? That's exactly what this is. This is a teenager. And in kind of what other medical situation would the health professional not dig into this further? And this is one of the things that, as I've learned from experts on this issue and the treatment of gender dysphoria, there are multiple ways to address it, including one saying that we're not just going to automatically move into affirmation. We're going to dig into this issue. We're going to try to figure out what else is going on in your life, and that's an acceptable way of treating this. But essentially, it's a child's self-fulfilling declaration, self-fulfilling self-diagnosis. And as long as a child is saying, look, that disagreement at my home, that's causing me anxiety, that's impacting my mental health, as long as that is present in a case like this, then the child's not going back. That's certainly what happened in the case that I've been referring to. And so in a sense, the presumption that the parent knows best is actually flipped. The case is exactly backwards, because now the trial court, DCS, simply assumes that the child knows best. And so that is what's been going on. That's exactly opposite of the presumption in the law. And certainly it is opposite of biblical commands. And again, I did want to just mention, and I'm not one to just kind of throw hyperbolic statements out there, but some of you may be thinking, this is overblown. This isn't really what people are advocating. And so I did want to just share with you, there is a bill that has been proposed here in the state of Indiana, HB 1407, which would plug some of the holes in Indiana law that have been interpreted in a way that will allow for a case like this. I mentioned, again, the Court of Appeals has ruled on the case. But I also did want to mention there was a hearing last week, and there was a representative here in the state of Indiana, a representative that I actually respect. But this representative, in that public testimony, a public hearing, said this. What I'm hearing is from all this testimony is, I want a straight kid, and I want to do anything in my power to change who they are. And then this representative said, the answer is acceptance and love and nurturing. Those are the true answers. And if we have that in place, then we don't have to go through my child is being taken away because they feel abused. Now, to be clear, what this representative is saying, the answer is acceptance and love and nurturing, meaning you just affirm the child. Those are the answers. You have that in place, then you don't have to go through your child being taken away from you because they feel abused. Again, that is directly against all of the constitutional principles that we have talked about today. That is directly against biblical principles, directly against constitutional principles as well. So this is an argument from the sexual revolution. This argument is being made. All right. And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to publish this episode, raise awareness about this issue. This has been a very, very difficult issue because you have parents that love their children. This child specifically are trying to work with him, to understand him, disciple him, try to figure out how to help him. But the state came in, intervened in the home, and took that opportunity away from them. So this certainly emphasizes the importance of building a relationship with your child, continuing that relationship into the teen years, but also of working with Christian mental health professionals that share your worldview. That you would need to rely kind of on both, certainly having that relationship, but also on Christian mental health professionals that would help you as you are doing your best to understand a child, lead them, guide them, but also stay true to what you believe. And if you want to look at the text of HB 1407, I will have a link in the show notes. Also, if you would like to hear kind of the full story of Mary and Jeremy Cox, I'll also put a link in the show notes to a video of this family that has been through so much, just trying to stand up for what they believe, trying to love their child well, and again, experiencing the state removing their child for more than 17 months. So again, why should we protect parental rights? Why do they need to be protected in the United States, in your state? Well, it'd be because parents, not the state, are primarily responsible for the formation of their children. State and federal constitutions have long protected these rights, and current protections are insufficient. We now have a court case in Indiana that could be used as a precedent, and legislation is being proposed that would address that. A petition to transfer has been filed to the Indiana Supreme Court asking for review. But this is out there. This is a precedent. And there are numerous things, all of the constitutional issues that were raised. There is a particular provision in our juvenile law that says nothing in this chapter shall be construed to limit the teaching of religious beliefs. The Court of Appeals literally just glanced over. I mean, it's right there in the law. It just glanced over some of the protections that we've long assumed would protect Christian parents and certainly parents of other faiths, such as Muslims, Orthodox Jews, Sikhs, Hindus, and even non-religious secular parents that would say, no, we believe in biological sex, and we don't follow along with the transgender revolution. And so, again, I just wanted to mention this is why parental rights need to be protected. Here are a few practical pointers, and I'll put some of these statements in the show notes as well. But for those that are working in this space, here are a couple of just some kind of common statements that I think are helpful to use in this space as you're trying to navigate a very, very difficult cultural issue. So first one would be that government should not override a fit parent's decision, fit meaning they're adequately caring for their child. Government should not override a fit parent's decision about raising their own children in order to enforce the state's ideology. I'll say that again. The government should not override a fit parent's decision about raising their own children in order to enforce the state's ideology. Next, parents should be free to raise their children according to their beliefs and best judgment without fear of the state taking custody of their children. Again, I thought this was very apparent, and this was not one of the issues I'd have to be talking about. Parents should be free to raise their children according to their beliefs and best judgment without fear of the state taking custody of their children. Another statement, parents have a right to make choices about the upbringing and education of their children, and parents shouldn't be left in the dark when it comes to profound decisions that involve the well-being of their own children. And I mentioned the case of DCS here today. I won't go into it too deeply, but there's evidence that there are many school districts around the country that are actually telling teachers, if your child comes to school, declares themselves to be transgender, that you cannot tell the parents. There are mental health professionals saying, well, if this is disclosed to a school counselor, that can't be disclosed to the parents. This does not make any sense, or either from a legal perspective, or why would you leave the parents? The parents have a profound impact on a child. They're a key player in the child's life, and the state somehow knows better than them, like to such an extent that they're just going to cut them out of this discussion. So parents shouldn't be left in the dark when it comes to profound decisions that involve the well-being of their own child. I think that's just a very simple, legal but practical principle. But also back to, again, just another kind of practical pointer for parents is certainly, as we endeavor to raise our children, and I think about my own children, and just how parenting is a difficult task, isn't it? But to love them, to raise them up, to be around the table, to encourage them from a very young age, to show them all of these things. And I'm not saying that the Cox family did not do that, but I think it is important for us as well to be thinking about that from the very beginning, from when they're born, as we raise them up. But also want to really emphasize the importance of building relationship, whether you're a church leader or even just a Christian parent. Maybe you're both, building a relationship with Christian counselors, those that would share your worldview about this issue, that would encourage your child along these lines to follow what the Bible has to say. We've talked previously about this concept of conversion therapy and how some people are trying to, some forces are trying to classify Christians simply teaching what the Bible says about these issues, and certainly what research is showing is best for these children, that's somehow a quote unquote conversion therapy. It's not. We absolutely have the right to share those beliefs and are the best judgment of mental health professionals and parents. And so building that relationship with a Christian counselor, Christian mental health professional, is going to be very, very important, especially in those early days if a child declares himself or herself to be homosexual or transgender. And then another thing is to work very closely with your school. That would be a Christian school, and certainly as well as a public school, of asking, is there a gender support plan in place? What is going on? Attending school board meetings, maybe even running for school board yourself, and then certainly advocating for parental rights, whether that's in your local context at your school or also at the state and even national level, raising awareness about this matter, even by just sharing this podcast. And so I will have links in the show notes to an article that I wrote for World Opinions, as well as to the bill being proposed in Indiana, videos of the parents, and would certainly welcome any questions if you'd like to dig further into what happened here in Indiana or what is going on around the country. And so, again, I do attempt to provide a comprehensive view of Christian citizenship, but this is one of those where, you come after a Christian's job. There are many things that are being impacted in culture, but is there anything more cherished, more important than our children and the right to raise them according to biblical principles? Again, it's that oldest of the fundamental liberty interests, and it's so important for us as Christian parents. So again, this is why parental rights need to be defended, both in your state as well as around the country. Would welcome your feedback on the episode. Again, Josh at goodcitizen.us.